Hello, welcome to another episode of Our Years.
This is Barry.
And I'm Rima.
And in today's episode, we'll be talking about culture shock. The other day, Rima and I were talking about when we realized that we were in the States.
Yeah.
And so in today's episode, we created like a list of things that we experienced in the couple of years here that made us feel like we had culture shock.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think we grew up in relatively westernized communities, even though you were in India and I was in South Africa, Taiwan. I think South Africa made me pretty westernized. But when I was in Taiwan, I think I was still pretty exposed to like Western culture.
Yeah.
Just because of the circle I was in. But yeah, I think coming here actually made me realize how different it actually is.
Yeah.
And so in today's episode, we thought we'd talk about that.
Yeah. What was the moment that you realized that you're in America?
Oh, I told Rima this, and it's actually so funny. And I mean no harm, but I remember coming to the States and I was doing my groceries. It was like the first week I was here, and I went to like a grocery store to pick up groceries, and I was going through the cereal aisle. And I was like, oh, let me just, buy cereal for like a week. And the options I had, the size of the cereal bag was like, and I mean no harm, but like, it was the size of like dog food.
It was like a sack.
It was like a sack that could feed like maybe 100 people for like a month. I was so shocked at how large the portions of the food that was being sold in supermarkets here were.
Yeah. And it's not just the size, it's also the varieties, right? It's just sugar coated cornflakes, but even that has like 7 types of varieties.
That's true.
And this is a regular grocery store. It's not like some Costco warehouse situation.
Yeah. Talking about sugar, I also remember like the first time I had like Shake Shack.
Yeah.
And I had the milkshake. I felt like it was really good and I really indulged in it, but I felt like I was going to get diabetes because of how sweet the milkshake was. And I was like, how can people be drinking this on like a daily?
Yeah. That was the thing for me about how prevalent sugar is in everything, including ketchup. I don't know if you realize this, but ketchup seems sweeter here.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't think I've mindfully, but I mean, you don't even know how to taste salt. How do you mean like taste sugar?
See, I can taste when something has a lot of something. I can't taste the lack of something. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Interesting. What about you?
I think the moment I realized that I was not in India anymore and I was like, okay, I'm in America now, is my first baseball game.
I remember you telling me this when we went to go watch
it was unlike anything I've ever seen before. And I've been to like organized sporting games in India. Cricket is big in India, and it's very much, I think the atmosphere is like similar to an atmosphere in a baseball game is similar to an atmosphere at a cricket match, for instance.
Yeah, fair.
Where like the crowd is really excited and there's like, it's almost like a party, right?
Yeah.
But just, I'd never been to a sporting event where I didn't know the rules. I didn't know anyone playing. I didn't have any context. And I was like, okay. The field was completely different. I was like, okay, I'm in America.
I remember something else you also said is when we were at the baseball game, you were like, people are just here to drink.
Yeah.
And I think it's called the 7th inning.
The 4th inning.
We don't know. I'm sorry. Please correct us. I think it's the 7th inning.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's when like people go get their last round of drinks.
Yeah, there's literally a call.
Yeah.
A call for action and to go get drinks.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. And nobody cares what's happening on the field. Also,
they're just there to socialize.
It's such an unserious for people who are practicing during the game.
I remember you saying this
I was like, what is this? What is this behavior?
They were practicing between when people were getting drinks, and it makes sense.
No, it doesn't. It's a freaking sporting event. It's not practice.
You gotta warm up,
No. That's also the like end of the game. So I don't understand what you're warming up for then.
I think another one I had, this is a huge one for me. Coming from like South Africa and Taiwan. So South Africa, maybe like infamously known for the crime and maybe unsafe environments. Not everywhere, obviously, but we had fencing around the houses. Kind of just to like fence off property and also just to prevent, strangers from coming up to your door. And so when I came to the States, it actually blew my mind that people's windows were open and anyone can walk up to the window, anyone can walk up to their door, and they sometimes forget to lock their doors.
Yeah.
that was like absolutely wild to me that the States is like that. And it's funny because when I was chatting to people about this, they thought I was strange for wanting a fence around my house. And I'm just like, privacy is key.
Yeah, privacy is key. I remember when I first met Barry, and we'd do maybe like day trips around Ithaca because we studied at Cornell. And any place we went to, the first thing, undoubtedly, Barry would point out how there's no fencing around the houses.
And like
and
no curtains.
Yeah, people's curtains were drawn and you could literally see into their houses. And this was the main takeaway from every trip.
It's wild.
Not the scenery.
No, I also noticed the scenery, okay?
It was secondary.
But yes, it was wild to me that is the case. And like literally anyone can walk up to your door.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah.
Yeah. It's also interesting how when we went to grad school was also the first time I was making a lot of American friends. And it's also interesting how social behavior norms are so different. Mm-hmm. I remember this one time so I had two roommates. One was Indian and one was American. And so it was my Indian roommate's birthday. And in India, when you have a birthday party, you cut your birthday cake and then you feed it to people, okay? And this is just a thing that up until that moment, I didn't realize others don't do that. So
naturally, you guys are just feeding everyone at the party.
Exactly. So me and my Indian roommate were obviously just cutting this cake and feeding each other and everybody else.
As if other people cannot feed themselves.
It's a thing, okay? And my American roommate goes very quiet. And she's an extrovert typically. And she she's part of the conversation. But she like gets drawn into herself. And I was like, what's happening? And she's like, why are you all feeding people cake? Like literally feeding people cake. And I was like, what do you mean it's a birthday party?
So to you, it was like very natural to do so.
Yeah, and I think it was shocking that other people were not doing it.
But you mean feeding as in like
literally I'm shoving it into your mouth. Yeah.
That's interesting. I feel like in Asia, we have something similar, but we don't feed people. It's more so after cutting the cake, like if it's a family event, you give it to the person that is maybe the most senior.
Okay.
And so if your grandpa's there, you would take a plate to your grandpa first and then your grandma. And there's also like a gender sort of priority as well.
Love
so
that.
Men over women. And it's interesting because we live in such a different time now, yet that is still
practiced.
Yeah, practiced. I think it's just purely what they would consider respect. You would never like give it to a child first.
Even if it's the child's birthday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Typically, if it's the person's birthday and if it's a child, then they get the last piece.
So in India, you also, like if you're celebrating with your parents, you also give them cake first. But it's also the feeding, like the literal feeding thing.
Yeah.
And that was so funny to me that other people were not doing it. And I had actually forgotten about it. And then I moved here. And similar story, it was an Indian friend's party, like birthday
and you
party.
Guys did that.
We did that and there were a lot of Americans in the room and they were also shocked again. And then I was like, oh yeah.
That's so funny. It's almost like reverse culture shock because you guys are in the States.
Right.
And it's almost like the people that are local to here were shocked by the culture that you brought.
Exactly. So it goes both ways. But yeah, it was really interesting how you're shocked by how they are shocked.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of food-related differences or culture shocks that I had when I moved to America. For instance, in India, and I'm sure in Taiwan, and even South Africa, I'm assuming, food is very communal-based. So even if you're in a restaurant and you order food for yourself, typically people will taste it or you share it, But when I moved here, I realized that that's not the norm and you don't offer your food to other people. Another culture shock related to food for me was portion size.
I think that goes back to how my culture shock of how big the cereal was. Like at the end of the day, all the portion sizes are huge.
Yeah. Like I have leftovers for days.
That's true. You can eat your leftovers for like an entire week.
Yeah. Exactly. So that was a big, that was also a culture shock about just the sheer quantity of everything.
Something else. I don't know about you, but I think because I did undergrad in Taiwan and then I came here for my master's. When I was doing undergrad in Taiwan, most students were not as engaged with the professor as they are here. Like I think people were very eager here to sit in the front row and to have discussions with their professors. And they were very open to discussion, right? But in Taiwan, it's interesting because people start filling up from the back of the lecture room instead of from the front.
Yeah.
And it's typically only one or two people who are overachievers that sit in the front row.
Yeah.
And that are like professors' pets.
Yeah, they're always like ragged on for being like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was interesting. And I really enjoyed that people or students here were actually very engaged and wanted to have these conversations with the professor. I think that cultivated environments of positive reinforcement learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
So the difference that I felt in terms of teaching and engaging with professors here versus in India was that in the US, I felt like my professors operated on a sense of inherent trust. For instance, if you didn't do an assignment, they didn't think you were slacking off. They made an effort to understand why you didn't do it. And it wasn't like your perception of, or it wasn't like their perception of you changed after that, right? But in India, I think professors also operate as pseudo parents. And so if you don't do an assignment, for instance, they take it upon themselves to like parent you, and they think it's a sign that you're flaking or that you're not taking your studies seriously. And it's a lot of that, which I didn't get here. Like here, I was treated more as an adult.
Interesting. Yeah, I think maybe that's like the cultural difference there is that here, I think my understanding is that when you're 18, you're an adult and your parents kind of trust you to go out and make your own decisions in the world, right? So what major you go into, if you want to go to college or not, that's all based on you.
Yeah.
And so I think the professors here operate on that, in that they trust that you're an adult and you can make your own decisions. Whereas I feel like maybe in the East and also Taiwan, it's almost like they still treat you like a kid and that you don't have the ability to make your own decisions.
Yeah. I felt that too. And it was interesting to see the difference. The other thing about student life, straight up, was dress code.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Tell more.
I mean, so our program was, part of it was in the business school and part of it was in the engineering school. And in the engineering school, people turned up to class in like they had just rolled out of bed. But in India, that behavior would not fly.
Interesting. I think I noticed that too and I feel like it's like an unspoken rule almost. When I went to go see my professor or had a one-on-one with a professor, I would never wear like short shorts, but like on my daily, maybe I would wear short shorts, but specifically on a day where I would go and see my professor, I would dress more conservatively. Yeah, that's interesting. I think that goes back then to like respect for people who are in authority or senior. Yeah.
Fear mongering.
While we were talking about like student life, I think one thing that I noticed, which I really enjoyed, is the variety of classes that you can take here. I think it's so extensive and it almost covers all areas that you might be interested in, especially at Cornell. And I think a lot of people said this about Cornell is that the classes that they offer are so huge in variety that any class that you can think of, you can probably find on campus. One which was a super popular one was wine tasting.
On early Tuesday morning.
Everybody loved that class because you could drink during class. And I actually had a friend take it and she said that it was actually a serious class. Like they actually, like the exams actually asked you very technical questions about wine tasting. And that was pretty difficult.
I think a lot of people took that course because they thought it was a fun way to day drink. But it was actually a very technical class.
Especially also because I think it was for undergrads an especially special class because I think the drinking age is 21 here. And so those folks can drink sooner than 21.
What's the drinking age in Taiwan?
It's 18.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is in South Africa as well.
Okay. In India, it's state-wise, or it used to be state-wise.
Oh, interesting.
So there were some states that were 18, but the capital...
Why do some states have this privilege of drinking earlier?
The capital, the drinking age at the capital used to be 21. And I think now there was some petition and now they brought it down to 18. But yeah.
But why? Like, are some states more responsible than others? Is that the reason?
No.
All children are the same.
They're getting hammered regardless of which state.
I remember you telling me you've been drinking since like 12. So
yeah, moving on.
censored. Now that we have like moved out of college and now started our own life, like I think we also noticed some different lifestyle changes or like culture shocks. So maybe we can jump into that.
Some of them are so small, and it's hard to explain to some of our American friends like how different the conditioning is. For instance, in India, if you have leftovers and you want a go box, typically it's packed by the kitchen or whoever's helping you.
Service is different.
Yeah, service is different. So when I moved here and I asked for a to-go box, I was just like sitting back and expecting the box to come to me.
And they brought the box out.
Yeah, and they brought the box out. And then initially I thought that was just the restaurant that I went to that did that. No. And I didn't know it was like every restaurant. So it's such small things, right? Like it's not a big deal to pack your food, but it's such a difference to what you've grown up seeing and experiencing.
I think inherently, that's like a culture thing, right? Because I don't know if you noticed, but that other day when we went to Besharam, they packed the food for us.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
They did.
And that's an Indian restaurant.
Yes. And I feel like if we went to an Asian restaurant, they would also pack the food for us.
Huh.
But if we go to like a local Western restaurant, we always pack our own food.
We need to do this A/B test.
I've already done the test.
I don't believe you.
But yes, notice that the next time we're there. But
okay.
I did see that Besharam did that for us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting to see how that culture was brought here, even though you're in the States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that was different in restaurants is that typically here, water is always iced.
Yes.
And you have to specifically mention when you don't want it.
Yes.
That was also like, it's such a small thing,
Yes.
but in India, ice water is not the norm.
That's true. That's true. Also in Taiwan. And I think maybe it's because like in Taiwan, it's more like a health sort of thing. They think that maybe cold water, because it's so different to your body temperature.
Yeah, the East really thinks cold water is out to get everybody.
My mom used to hate, or still hates, that we drink iced water. And like, I'm not a huge fan of iced water, but like just in summer when you want to like just ice your drinks, she's just like, that is so bad for your body.
You want to talk about how you're a sparkling water convert?
I was just about to talk about how I am this person now.
You are this person.
I've never liked sparkling water, and I'm just not a fan of like sparkling drinks to begin with. But recently I've discovered a love
I've
for
noticed.
soda water. And I don't know what it is, but I just do like
You're
it now.
integrating into society.
I am. It just goes to show the extent at which I am slowly fitting in.
Yeah, sparkling water.
That is the way to go.
That's the benchmark.
That's the entrance to being a local.
Another difference I noticed when eating out here is the concept of tip culture. So growing up in India, typically service tax was baked into the bill.
Yep.
And so you didn't have to tip. There were certain restaurants that did have a tipping culture, but they were more high end.
Right.
And so this tipping thing is very new for me. But now when I go back and visit India, I've noticed that culture has sort of like seeped into India as well.
Really?
Yeah. So now tipping culture is very prevalent in India too. And I think that's sort of been taken in from the West.
Interesting. Maybe I haven't noticed, but in Taiwan, I don't think we actually tip at all. It's like part of their job. So, and I think maybe the difference is that this is what I've heard, that in the States, that a lot of restaurants do not actually pay a base salary to their waiters and waitresses.
Yeah.
It's like they earn their money from the tips that they get from their tables that they serve.
Yeah. I don't like that. It should be part of their job.
I guess I guess the motivation there is that how well you serve the customers will be reflected on how much tip you get.
Yeah.
Too. And also, I guess like in Taiwan, not so much a culture shock, but something different that I noticed is that tax is included in the price that you see on any sort of items that you buy.
Yeah.
Whereas here, you always have to calculate additional like 10-12%.
Yeah, in India too. Most things have the tax baked into the price.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting too.
Yeah, the difference here when you buy something and the tax gets added only once you've rang it up.
And you're like, this is not what I agreed to pay. I did not see this price. Why didn't people tell me?
What are the other lifestyle differences that you've noticed?
Oh, one big one I think is something I noticed also back in South Africa that folks did this is having shoes in the house. And it actually blows my mind because scientifically, it just makes sense that if you're wearing your shoes out on the streets,
Yeah.
how dirty the streets are, and you're bringing all those germs and bacteria into your home. And the worst I've seen is some folks wear their shoes on their beds.
I've seen that too, and that has been shocking to me as well. An American friend was telling me that the person that he's dating is Asian, and he actually likes that so much, and he talked about it to his family, and now they've all become a no shoe household.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I don't think all Americans are like that, but I think a majority of Americans wear shoes in the house. Another one that I think was a big one for me is the gaps in the doors of public restrooms. Not even just the gaps between the door and the stalls itself, but also the gaps from the bottom to the top. It's like you get minimal privacy. I actually looked it up, and the reason they have the wide gaps at the bottom is it makes hosing down the restrooms a lot easier and more convenient for the cleaners, which I think for practical reasons makes sense.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Positive culture shock is that when I moved here, I saw how widespread and clean public restrooms were here, which is not the case in India.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think compared to Taiwan's cleaner than the ones here.
No, I feel like India's public restroom scene. I feel like India's public restrooms are not accessible and they're not always clean.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Well, wait till you come to Taiwan. Another thing I noticed in the States is how big consumerism is. And I think the reason that it is so big is because of how accessible it is to swap or to return your products.
It's so interesting for me to hear you say that, because when I hear you say that, I feel like India and America are so similar in that regard. So it's interesting for me to hear that Taiwan is so different.
I feel like it's different in the sense that, products here, if you've used it, you can still return it.
Yeah, even in India.
Wow.
And they make delivery so easy. So I think India now, a lot of the commerce is quick commerce, and hyper convenience is sort of the metric. You can get things delivered to you in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And these are not essentials.
Wow.
Yeah, these are like clothes or snacks, and you can get delivered in 10 minutes.
So I assume consumerism is huge in India too.
Yeah. It's, I think, more than the actual product, it's the ease at which you can get things and return things.
Right.
And a lot of businesses in India now that are making a lot of money or like have a lot of funding are typically focused on hyper convenience. And I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if you need clothes delivered to you in 10 minutes. And it's such a vicious cycle, because I feel like it's changing people's behavior and how mindful they are and how they consume.
I was just about to say, I feel like that kind of encourages waste.
In that regard, I think America and India are very similar. I think India is actually more easier to do returns in, because people will come and take the packages from the door, from your hand.
Wow.
Yeah. Dude, it's ridiculous. This one time I was waiting for a delivery in India, and I was out. He waited for me to come back to give it to me.
Wow.
But yeah, that wouldn't fly here, and I don't know if that would fly in Taiwan. Yeah, but like hyper convenience in India is very much a thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think culturally maybe just differences in terms of like how you spend and your mindfulness about wasting products. But I think it's all a cycle, right? Because of how convenient and accessible it is to return. That's why people impulse buy, and that's why people are less mindful about waste that they create in the cycle.
Yeah, that was a culture shock for me about how difficult returns are over here.
Oh, wow. What a problem. What a privilege.
I thought returns here were more difficult.
Interesting. I guess returns in Taiwan are relatively easy, like clothing and stuff, because of how many convenience stores we have. And literally Taiwan is so convenient. Like the epitome of convenience stores is embodied in like the 7-Elevens of Taiwan. You can pay for bills, you can, take and return products, you can pick up products, and there's literally one at every single
Imagine a 7-Eleven person coming home and taking your taking your returns for you.
What do you mean?
That's what happens in India.
Oh, wow. Okay, yes.
Not 7-Eleven,
you don't even need to
but
go to
that's
the
what I mean.
They just
I'm
rock
used
up at
to
your
that
door.
service.
Wow.
So here when I'm asked to drop off a box at like
Crazy.
UPS, and I'm like, ugh.
Crazy.
Very spot.
Yeah. Another one as part of my life that I've noticed is getting sick in the States is so difficult because of how inaccessible healthcare is.
Someone once told me don't get sick. And that's the strategy.
It's so interesting. I think like growing up in South Africa, I never really went to go see a doctor when I got the flu or a cold. I kind of just naturally healed. And I think my parents encouraged that because, you know, natural healing is good. But obviously you would go see a doctor if needed. But when I moved to Taiwan for a few years, I noticed how accessible healthcare is, and then having gone through that for like 6-7 years and then come to the States, I realized how privileged we are in Asia to have easy access to healthcare, and it's cheap, right? So seeing a doctor, you can just literally, you don't even need to book an appointment. You just go up to any clinic. It doesn't have to be a dedicated doctor to you. You can go see any doctor. You just pitch up at a clinic and then badge in.
Yeah.
And it was just so easy. And then coming here to the States, I think the first time I felt sick and I couldn't find a doctor because it was at midnight made me realize what a privilege that is.
Similar experience. The healthcare in India is very similar to how healthcare management is done in Taiwan. And so when I moved here, that was a culture shock in how to even understand what a primary healthcare physician is.
Having a primary doctor, and then you need your primary doctor to refer you to a specialist.
Yeah, that whole system was new to me.
Yeah.
And it seems really roundabout. And sure, we can talk about lobbying and why it is the way it is.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's so crazy to me how that is the system. Like, if you're sick and you need immediate care, the only sort of care that you can get is urgent care, right? And that's a lot more expensive than going through your usual doctor.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me also, like when finding a doctor or finding a primary care doctor was so difficult, and you would need to find someone who is willing to take in.
Yeah. All of these are alien concepts. All of these were alien concepts
so
to me
new
as well.
to me.
Yeah.
And because in Taiwan, I didn't have a primary doctor. I would just go see who would be available at that time. And typically doctors are very great. So like you don't need a certain doctor to take care of you specifically.
Yeah. That was a huge thing for me as well.
Yeah. Another thing as part of healthcare is how interesting certain products are over the counter that you can just buy from like a pharmacy. In Taiwan, I was able to get contact lenses from a store that sells glasses, or even just from like a regular store that sells like skincare or like beauty healthcare products. I was able to just go and pick up my contact lenses. Whereas here, I learned in the States, you need a prescription from your doctor, and you need to take that prescription before they provide you with contact lenses. And it's quite interesting because I think in Taiwan, you're able to get your prescriptions for your eyes through any like spectacle or like glasses store, and then you can use that to go or know what specifications you need for your contact lenses and just go buy them yourselves. And I think maybe because so many people wear glasses in Taiwan that they made it so accessible. That is my hypothesis.
It's not like a broader management
because then
strategy.
All these doctors, all they would be dealing with is handing out prescriptions for like people that need glasses, and that's like 90% of the country. So I think it makes sense that you just go handle it yourself.
Every time we go back to visit our family in like Taiwan and India, I feel like we have a laundry list of things that we need to do specifically related to healthcare, that we just need to like nip everything in the bud before we come back.
That's true. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think the point is that some certain products are sold here like off the shelf, whereas in Taiwan you maybe need to go through certain doctors and then vice versa. So it's just interesting to see what sort of products are or can be sold over the counter. Yeah.
Lenses, who would have thought?
I know, crazy. So this is me going back to Taiwan. Half of my luggage is like coming back with contact lenses to supply me for the year.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I don't see you doing that here. So you get it back from Taiwan.
Yep.
I just get snacks from India.
The other half is snacks for me. So have contact lenses, have snacks. Not that you cannot buy the snacks here.
No, but like who wants to pay $5 for something that's like $1?
Not even
back in
50
India.
cents. I think maybe this one is more specific to me because you don't drive, but I noticed like the culture shock in like the driving. Obviously here roads are much bigger and a lot more like accessibility to like highways, but people on the highways, wow, I don't want to be mean here, but people are not nice on the highways. They don't indicate, they just like cut into your lane, they just do whatever. It's just wild to me how like people are not very, I don't think, respectful on the roads. And sure, like I think like you get people like that all over the world.
Yeah.
But in general, people are pretty respectful, like in Asia and in South Africa. Like you indicate when you need to turn left. That freaking is a pet peeve when I am driving. I think I turn into a different person when I drive on the highways because people are just, it's just wild to me that people drive the way they do here.
Yeah, this is how people drive in India. So there was no culture shock for me.
Yeah.
I don't drive a lot here. But when I listen to you in the car talk about how people are cutting you left, right, and
get
center.
so mad.
Yeah.
I get so mad.
Yeah, that's how people drive in India.
Yeah.
When you visit India, you will not be driving.
We'll find out.
I think you'll have a
TBD.
stroke in India if you see what happens. There are no rules.
I think I'll need to take like some sort of like.
I think we'll just keep you inside the house.
Yeah, I think so.
We'll just show you the delivery system.
Yeah, I don't need to leave the house. I feel
Yeah,
like in India,
everything will
it's
come to you.
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't even need to go talk to people.
No.
Another one while driving is what I noticed is that here in the States, you can turn right on red. That is a wild concept to me. It's actually illegal in Taiwan to do so, and for right reasons, because you know when you turn right, when oncoming cars will easily like slam into you.
Yeah.
It's wild to me that here you get honked or hooted at for not turning right on red, unless obviously there's a sign that says you cannot.
Yeah.
But that is a wild concept to me. I mean, I'm a fan of it because it's just convenient and great and you don't have to wait. But it's actually pretty dangerous sometimes.
Yeah. That really tripped me up when I was doing my driver's license test. And I had to be very mindful of that.
Because I think they fail you if you don't actually turn right on red.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. That's quite an interesting one.
I passed it on my first try.
Okay. And yet she still doesn't drive.
Because who wants to own a car in SF?
That is true.
What were other social interactions or just you engaging with folks here? How was that different?
The hi, how are you? But not actually meaning hi, how are you? That's just part of like a greeting.
Salutation, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially on like hikes. Everybody's so friendly. And I love that. Everybody's friendly. You kind of smile at each other. But it's interesting because when I first came here, I actually was putting an effort to reply to the how are you parts. And I would actually tell them how I am.
Yeah.
But now I feel like I've noticed that I've kind of just been like, oh, good. How are you?
Yeah.
And not actually going into my life story about how the past week has been.
I would start with my woes when people are like, how's it going?
And all they wanted, you see, it's actually quite funny because you see them walking off as they say, hi, how are you? It's like, hi, how are you? And then, not even waiting for you to answer. So yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
You
learn the embarrassing way because you started this story, but nobody's here to listen to you.
Truly. But yeah, now I learned to just, answer with like a good, and you don't say anything outside of good. You don't tell them bad.
Nobody has time for that.
Correct.
Go to your therapist.
Correct.
Yeah. Even the other thing on hikes is also that when you pass someone here on a hike, you will make eye contact and you will greet them and
eye contact is strong. Which is great because you kind of like respect the person in that way. Yeah.
In India, it's like it's almost considered staring if you look at someone. So it's not encouraged.
Yeah.
And nobody's like greeting you when you're on hikes in India. But here, regardless of how tired the other person is, they'll be like huffing and panting and out of breath, but they will still smile and say hello to you.
Yeah. Going off of that, I think also like just smiling at strangers and complimenting strangers is a huge one here in the States.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because I think in Asia, if you do something like that, people almost feel like you have intentions.
Yes. So that's suspicious.
That's like, why are you asking or why are you complimenting me? What do you want? It's so funny. And I think maybe because like at least in Taiwan when people do that, right, like it's almost like they're about to come off and sell you something
want your money.
or it's like scam you. Or another one is, especially if it's like the opposite gender, they'll think that you're trying to hit on them.
Yeah.
It's it's quite interesting. And I noticed that especially when I moved to Taiwan, because coming from South Africa and then moving to Taiwan, in South Africa people are generally like the States where you compliment strangers and it's all just like positive.
Yeah.
When I went to Taiwan and I did that, especially to the opposite gender, they were all like, oh,
She's
my gosh,
coming on to me.
Barry's interested in me. I should do something about this now. And they felt like the need to act differently. And I'm just like, purely, you just look like you have a fresh haircut. And I just want to tell you that. Yeah. So that was a huge culture shock coming from Taiwan here, because I got used to that sort of environment when I was in Taiwan.
That's interesting. You had two culture shocks.
Going from South Africa to Taiwan,
Yeah.
and then from Taiwan to here. Yes, I agree.
I can see how I imagine the culture in South Africa is very similar to American culture, where people are more open to talking to strangers.
Yes. I think going back to your point about dress codes, right? I think in the States here, people are very expressive through the way they dress. I think that was a culture shock for me, having gone again from South Africa to Taiwan and Taiwan to here. Taiwan's pretty conservative, I want to say. And the way you dress kind of shows the respect that you have for other people instead of respect for yourself, or like prioritizing respect for yourself. I think here it's like prioritizing respect for yourself because you express yourself through the way you dress, right? I think in Taiwan, I remember it was in the dead of summer and it was like some 35 degrees Celsius outside. So I was wearing like spaghetti strap tank top. And I think one of my students' friends was like, oh, Barry, you might want to like cover up because you're showing like too much skin, etc. And that was like a huge culture shock for me because, well, having moved from Western culture to Taiwanese culture, because of how conservative they are in the way they dress. Yeah. And I appreciate like coming here to the state that people show character through the way they dress. And I think it's a good way to express yourself, and I think it's needed. Yeah.
Yeah. India also dresses very conservatively. So one culture shock that I had when I moved here was that I actually wasn't thinking so hard about what I was wearing. Like whether my skirt was too short or my top was too low cut. Like I wasn't thinking about that. And I didn't even realize until I went back to India to visit. And then I had to think again about I had to think about what I was wearing. And so I was like, oh, wow. I didn't even realize that switch happened.
Right.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because now that you mentioned that, when I go back to Taiwan, I mindfully bring certain clothes. I don't bring like more skin revealing clothes back to Taiwan because in that sort of environment, I don't really wear clothing like that. Obviously, I think that times have changed, and depending on the city that you're living in, that also impacts. I think, for example, like Taipei, international, I would say. And so I don't think it's as conservative as maybe more south of Taiwan.
Yeah. I see the difference now when I go back and I see people I see kids and how they're dressing now. It's very akin to what kids in America are dressing like.
True.
But when I was growing up, I was definitely had to be mindful about what I was wearing. And okay, I don't even want to make India sound like some Taliban state, but it was still such a difference. And I grew up in a very progressive city. And even then I felt the culture shock when I moved here about clothing.
Right.
So I can only imagine what people from like smaller cities or tier 2 or tier 3 cities would feel like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I feel like there's so much that we first noticed when we moved here to the States, but like now that we've been here like almost 3-4 years now. 3 years.
4. We moved here 21.
Wow, that's crazy. Have we been here that long?
Yeah. The other day I was telling someone how long I've been here, and I was like, wow, it's been a while.
Wow, it's crazy. I still feel like a newbie here. But having said that, though, while we're talking about like these culture shocks, it's funny that we're like talking about it now, because I think we don't even notice those things anymore because of, I guess, the 4 years we've been here has kind of made us or adjusted us to.
Yeah, some of us have started drinking sparkling water.
You just got to integrate yourself into the culture.
That's American culture, sparkling water.
I don't think it's American culture, maybe Western culture in general, but I am slowly integrating myself. I don't know about you. Maybe I should get you on sparkling water.
No, hard pass. But yeah, it's interesting how you see the differences, both pros and cons, when you move, and you realize that in some aspects people are so similar, and in some aspects so different.
So different, right?
Yeah. And every culture has pros and cons. I don't think anyone's winning.
Yeah.
I'm glad we get to experience both.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we've grown a lot because of having the luxury of experiencing both. I think it expands your knowledge because I feel like cultural shocks are just you not understanding the culture, right?
Yeah,
And so
exactly. And during the course of this conversation, I realized that just being from the East as well, like we're very different in terms of what our conditioning has been or what we're used to.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, tell us what culture shocks you guys have experienced. We'd be interested to hear all the other culture shocks that people have experienced upon coming to the States.
Yeah, drop those in comments.
Yeah. We'll see you guys in the next one.
See you.
Bye.